Pride Comes Before the Ambush by Ruben White. The autumn wind whistled through Telegraph Pass like a lonely coyote's call, stirring up devils of dust that danced across the narrow trail. Jebediah Hawkeye Harrison adjusted his shotgun across his lap, his weathered fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the well-worn stock. 3 days into his new assignment as shotgun messenger for the Mountain Express stage line, and he was already regretting taking the job. It wasn't the threat of bandits that bothered him, he'd faced down plenty of outlaws during his years as a Texas Ranger. No, what was getting under his skin worse than a chigger in August was the man sitting next to him on the driver's box, one Curtis "Wildcard" Wilson. Wildcard lived up to his nickname, all right. Unpredictable as a rattler in a rain barrel, the man handled the reins of the 6-horse team like he was born to it. Problem was, he knew it too well, and pride had roosted in his head like a fat hen that wouldn't budge. Don't see why old man Jenkins insisted on saddling me with a shotgun messenger, Wildcard grumbled for what must have been the 100th time that morning, his handlebar mustache twitching with each word. 15 years I've been running stages through Apache country, and I ain't lost a single shipment yet. Know every rock and tree from here to Santa Fe. Hawkeye spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side of the coach, watching it disappear into the swirling dust. Maybe because this time you're carrying 50,000 in Wells Fargo gold, and word travels faster than a prairie fire in these parts. The strong box was bolted under their feet, innocent looking enough, but heavy with the kind of temptation that could turn honest men into devils. News of the shipment had leaked in Silver City, and Hawkeye had caught wind of at least 3 different gangs that might be interested in lightening their load. Wildcard just snorted, flicking the reins to urge the team around a sharp bend. Had me a whole gang of Comancheras try to stop me once, back in '71. Ran them clean off the trail and into a box canyon. Found what was left of them 2 days later, after the buzzards led me in. That so? Hawkeye kept his voice neutral, though his steel-gray eyes never stopped scanning the rocky slopes that hemmed them in on both sides. Telegraph Pass was notorious for ambushes, too many blind corners, too many high perches for a man with a rifle to nest in. The stage rattled on, its wooden wheels clattering against stones and ruts in the trail. Inside rode 3 passengers, a Presbyterian minister headed for his new posting in Tombstone, a Boston-bred mining engineer with fancy leather luggage, and a widow woman traveling to join her sister in Tucson. All of them had been warned about the dangerous stretch ahead, but Wildcard's confidence had seemed to ease their fears. Hawkeye knew better. 20 years of tracking men who lived outside the law had taught him that confidence was often just the sugar coating on a bitter pill of foolishness. He'd buried too many brave men who thought they were invincible. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill and replacing it with the kind of heat that made a man's thoughts move like molasses. They were making good time, maybe too good. Wildcard handled the team like a master, taking the curves at speeds that had the passengers grabbing for handholds and saying extra prayers. Might want to ease up a bit, Hawkeye suggested as they approached a particularly treacherous stretch. This here's where the Martinez gang jumped the El Paso stage last spring. Wildcard laughed, the sound as harsh as a crow's call. Martinez? That yellow-bellied snake couldn't rob a blind man's cup. Besides, I got me a special surprise for any bandits fool enough to try their luck today. He patted the coach seat between them, where Hawkeye knew he kept a sawed-off 10-gauge loaded with double-aught buck. A shotgun's no good if you don't see them coming, Hawkeye muttered, but Wildcard was already focused on navigating the next bend, the horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust that briefly obscured the trail ahead. That's when Hawkeye saw it, a flash of sunlight on metal up on the ridge to their right. His muscles tensed, but he kept his voice calm. Wildcard, I reckon we ought to. The shot cracked across the canyon like thunder, and the lead horse reared with a terrible scream. Wildcard cursed and hauled on the reins as more shots rang out, bullets whining past them like angry hornets. The stage slewed sideways, wheels leaving the ground for a heart-stopping moment before crashing back down. Yah! Wildcard stood up, reaching for his shotgun instead of fighting to control the panicked team. Hawkeye grabbed him by the back of his vest and yanked him down just as a rifle slug took his hat clean off. Get us out of here, you damn fool! Hawkeye roared, already returning fire at the shadows moving among the rocks above. He caught a glimpse of at least 5 riders, maybe more, spreading out to cut off their escape. Wildcard finally remembered his primary duty and gathered the reins, but the damage was done. The lead horse was down, thrashing in the traces, while the others fought against their harnesses in blind panic. The stage was going nowhere. "Both of you, throw down your guns and step away from the coach." The voice echoed from above, followed by the distinctive sound of several rifles being cocked. "We just want the strong box, no need for anyone to die today." Hawkeye recognized that voice, Jake the Snake McLaren, one of the most notorious stage robbers in the territory. The man had a reputation for being reasonable, as far as outlaws went, but he'd still killed 3 men in his last hold-up. "Like hell!" Wildcard shouted back, raising his shotgun. "Come and get it, you yellow-bellied!" The rest of his challenge was drowned out by another volley of shots. Hawkeye grabbed Wildcard and pulled him behind the relative safety of the coach's iron-bound rear wheel. Inside, the passengers were screaming, and the minister was trying to calm them with prayers that seemed far too desperate for comfort. "Listen to me," Hawkeye hissed, keeping his voice low. "Those men up there ain't playing games. McLaren's got us outgunned and outpositioned. But I know these hills, and there's a box canyon about 50 yards back. If we can get the passengers there." Wildcard's face was red with fury and wounded pride. "I ain't running from no bandits. I told Jenkins I could handle any." "Shut up and think." Hawkeye fought to keep his temper. "You got 3 innocent people depending on you. Your pride worth their lives?" Something in his words finally seemed to penetrate Wildcard's thick skull. The driver's shoulders slumped slightly, and he nodded. "What's your plan?" For the next few minutes, they spoke in whispers while occasional shots kept them pinned down. The horses had settled somewhat, though the wounded leader was still down, effectively anchoring the stage in place. McLaren's men were being patient, content to wait them out. "Time's running out," McLaren called down. "Next volley won't be over your heads." "Now or never," Hawkeye muttered. He raised his voice, "Hold your fire. We're sending out the passengers." The minister helped the widow and the engineer out of the stage, all of them crouching low. On Hawkeye's signal, they began moving backward along the trail, using the stage for cover as long as possible. "Smart move," McLaren shouted. "Now you boys step out nice and slow, and where we can see them." Instead, Hawkeye pulled 2 sticks of dynamite from his coat pocket, insurance he'd brought along just in case. Wildcard's eyes widened as Hawkeye lit the fuses with his quirly. "Cover your ears." Hawkeye called to the retreating passengers, then hurled both sticks up onto the ridge where he'd spotted the densest concentration of bandits. The explosion sent rocks and debris raining down, accompanied by startled yells and cursing. "Run!" Hawkeye shoved Wildcard toward the passengers, then laid down covering fire with both his shotgun and revolver. They made it to the box canyon just as McLaren's gang recovered enough to mount a pursuit. The narrow entrance to the canyon was barely wide enough for 2 men to stand shoulder to shoulder. Hawkeye took position on one side, Wildcard on the other, both men's guns ready. "Ain't no way out of there." McLaren's voice carried clearly. "You're just making it harder on yourselves." He was right about there being no exit. The canyon walls rose straight up for 100 feet on 3 sides. But what McLaren didn't know was that Hawkeye had used this same canyon 3 years earlier to trap a gang of horse thieves. He knew every handhold and crack in those walls. "Those 3 boulders to your left," he whispered to Wildcard. "They're balanced just right. 1 good shot." Understanding dawned in the driver's eyes. He aimed his shotgun carefully, then fired both barrels. The roar of the gun was followed by an even louder rumble as the boulders came loose, starting a cascade that partially blocked the canyon entrance. "That'll slow them down," Hawkeye said grimly. "Now for the hard part." He turned to the terrified passengers. "How are you at climbing?" The next hour was a blur of careful instruction and even more careful movement as Hawkeye guided the group up a nearly invisible path he'd discovered years ago. The widow proved surprisingly agile, while the minister struggled but persevered with quiet determination. The mining engineers' experience with vertical shafts came in handy. They could hear McLaren's men trying to clear the rockfall below, accompanied by increasingly creative cursing. By the time the outlaws managed to break through, their quarry was already over the rim of the canyon and working their way around to where the stage sat abandoned. What happened next would be talked about in every saloon from El Paso to Yuma for years to come. While McLaren's gang searched the box canyon, Hawkeye led his group back to the stage. Wildcard's expertise with horses proved invaluable as they quickly cut away the dead leader and rigged the remaining 5 animals into a workable team. The strong box was still bolted in place, but now they had time to remove it properly. Between the 4 men, they managed to transfer it to the boot at the back of the stage. Wildcard took the reins again, but this time there was a new respect in the way he looked at Hawkeye. They were 5 miles down the trail, making good time toward the relay station, when they heard horses pursuing them. Hawkeye turned to see McLaren and his men emerging from the pass, riding hard. "They're gonna catch us," Wildcard said grimly. "Team's too tired to outrun fresh horses." Hawkeye nodded. "Then we make our stand where we choose." He pointed ahead to where the trail wound between 2 massive rock formations. There. They had barely enough time to get the passengers behind cover and set up their ambush before McLaren's gang arrived. What followed was the kind of gunfight that would have made a dime novel writer's fortune. McLaren's men rode straight into the trap, caught between Hawkeye's deadly accurate rifle fire from above and Wildcard's shotgun blasts from behind a fallen boulder. The widow proved handy with a derringer she'd kept hidden in her reticule, while the minister shocked everyone by displaying remarkable skill with the mining engineer's spare revolver. When the smoke cleared, 2 of McLaren's men were dead, 3 were wounded, and the notorious outlaw himself was face down in the dust with Hawkeye's knee in his back. "I thought you said you didn't need no shotgun messenger," Hawkeye said to Wildcard as they tied up the prisoners. The driver grinned sheepishly, his mustache now coated with rock dust. "Reckon I might have been a mite overconfident there. Say, you wouldn't be interested in making this arrangement permanent, would you? Stage line's always looking for good men." Hawkeye considered it as he helped the widow back into the coach. The pay was decent, the work regular, and it beat chasing outlaws across the territory as a freelancer. Besides, somebody had to keep Wildcard's pride from writing checks his gun couldn't cash. "Might be," he allowed, climbing back up to the driver's box. "Long as you remember that pride's like a rattler in your boot, best to shake it out before it bites you." Wildcard laughed and slapped the reins. The stage rolled on toward Tucson, leaving Telegraph Pass and its dangers behind. But both men knew there would be other passes, other ambushes, other days when survival would depend on trusting each other more than their pride. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, like nature's own reward for a job well done. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, not lonely this time, but triumphant. Hawkeye settled his shotgun across his lap and smiled. Maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all. The Presbyterian minister stuck his head out the window. "I don't suppose either of you gentlemen would care to explain how you knew about that path up the canyon wall." Hawkeye and Wildcard shared a look, then both men burst out laughing. Some stories, they silently agreed, were best saved for another day, preferably over whiskey in a safe, well-lit saloon, far from any place where outlaws might be listening. As the stage disappeared into the gathering dusk, the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves and wheels, and the occasional chuckle from 2 men who had learned that sometimes the best way to handle trouble was to face it together. The end. Join the adventure with the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed. If you're loving our cowboy stories and captivating tales, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our future posts. Saddle up and ride along with us.